Otherwise, I'd lose my rent, I'd have to pay more poll tax, and I would end up worse off.
Unemployed people on this government scheme clear wasteland for just an extra £10 a week on top of their dole, but it's voluntary. Now the government may be considering compulsion. A scheme the Employment Department is looking at would compel people out of work for more than 18 months to take a job. They'd get £10 a week extra. The scheme would take 400,000 people out of the dole queues, but it would cost £670 million. It could be paid for by putting 50p a week on employee national insurance contributions.
There's every temptation under the sun to say if you've been out for more than a few months, don't bother. Don't even look at the application. Don't give it the time of day. What we've got to do is help the longer-term unemployed get on the inside again. And this programme, by giving them work assignments, work experience with real employers in the public and private sector, can do just that.
The compulsory element of workfare already exists for the under-18s. If they're not at school or in work, they must train or lose their dole. Workfare, like schemes in America, Sweden and Australia, sometimes means expensive training and sometimes manual drudgery. Some say training often isn't as valuable as practical work, since it can increase people's aspirations without improving their skills. The unions would strongly oppose the creation of a cheap labour force.
I hope it's an idea that the government will throw away. This country doesn't need workfare, it needs work.
And many of the unemployed may think workfare's implication that they don't really want to work is an added insult, when there's an average of 27 people chasing every job vacancy.
I think it's a bloody disgrace. I think if there's work to be done out there, then they should pay us a proper wage. That's a bloody disgrace.
Workfare ideas are fermenting within both parties. On both sides there are those strongly for and against. But in the end it'll be the quality of the scheme the government chooses that will determine how much support or opposition there would be.
The Prime Minister has tonight rejected claims by the Labour leader John Smith that standards in the civil service had deteriorated. Mr Smith said last week that the long spell of Conservative rule had damaged the impartiality of senior officials. But Mr Major, speaking to the Civil Service Club this evening, said Mr Smith's comments were astonishing and regrettable. He said ministers were always given questioning and sometimes unwelcome advice from their civil servants. It was how robust policies are formed, he said. The receiver appointed to administer Leyland DAF has agreed a bridging package to keep the company going for the time being. But British unions have attacked the loan, saying it favours the company's operations in the Netherlands. In the Commons, the Labour leader John Smith called again for government intervention to help Leyland DAF.
The receiver for Leyland DAF said today that funds are now in place to ensure production resumes and the workers' pay is guaranteed. But the company's trade unions believe that the bridging arrangement gives Leyland DAF little more than temporary security, whereas DAF's factories in Holland and Belgium have guarantees underpinned by bank loans to keep going for a month till a rescue package emerges.
We have very grave concerns. The workers on the continent have far better security and guarantee as a result of the intervention of the Dutch and Belgian governments and this rescue package. We, on behalf of our members, are living on a day-to-day basis and we are eagerly awaiting our meeting with the receiver.
DAF in Holland confirmed today that it had secured a bridging loan believed to be worth £22 million with the aid of the Dutch government. But Dutch unions say their economics minister says state aid will only be for factories in Holland.
Mr Andriessen said to us yesterday that he only wants to give money to the Dutch part. So he doesn't want to give money to England when the English government doesn't want to pay for their own country.
As the campaign to save the jobs began today, the receivers in Britain refused to say how much funding they have secured or how long it'll last. A statement is expected early next week. But there's some good news for Leyland DAF. The latest industry figures out today show the company is still leading the market for truck sales in Britain. The question the unions are asking, though, is for how much longer?
Fighting has started again between Croats and Muslims in central Bosnia, breaking an uneasy ceasefire which had generally been holding during the week. The fighting centred on the village of Merdani, not far from the British base at Vitez. They were called to assess the situation.
Heading into gunfire towards yet another village erupting in flames, British UN troops were merely responding to a request to see what could be done. The main road blocked, 2 warriors squirmed along a farm track in response to the Croats' request that the British colonel intervene personally in a dispute over hostages. With bullets pinging off their vehicles, they inched their way towards Madani, where the Croats alleged that a dozen of their men were being held hostage by Muslims. The fight had been in progress for some hours, and it wasn't immediately clear who was holding the village across the river, only that they were losing house after house. This is one of the tougher ways to gather information for use in ceasefire negotiations, while anti-aircraft rounds streak overhead. Then, with another rickety bridge to be avoided, the farm track betrayed the warrior. "35 tons, a full load of ammunition.
Harry, turn the engine off! Turn the engine off!
Wait, okay.
One of the crew wriggled out as fuel trickled into the snow. Colonel Stewart could hear the driver, who was trapped upside down. The Croats and Muslims, meanwhile, fought on.
The driver's okay. Well done. Now.
The driver was extracted to join the rest of the crew with just a few bruises. And tomorrow, the British will be back, trying to get a ceasefire. 880 BBC News, Bosnia.
The White House has said that President Clinton will back the Bosnian peace plan only if all the warring parties agree to it. In New York, the co-chairman of the peace talks, Lord Owen and Cyrus Vance, have been lobbying heavily to win support for their proposals.
The new president is still reviewing his policy on Bosnia, and the statement issued today in his name was at best a half-hearted endorsement of the Vance-Owen plan. The administration wants more, but has yet to specify what. Its objections are rooted in the maps, which it says ratify the ethnic cleansing by the Serbs. The negotiators' officials deny that.
This plan punishes the Serbs. Let's be very clear about that.
And Lord Owen has been campaigning openly on American television.
Our problem is now much more, I'm afraid, with the Bosnian Muslims, who are showing great reluctance to come because they're waiting for the American administration. They hope that the American administration will try and lift the arms embargo or come in on the ground and internationalize it and help them.
Some of the leaders are here, but not all, and it is the Serb, Radovan Karadzic, who is courting world opinion with professions of peace.
I am hopeful, and that's why we came here to help this peace process. Any war has to end, and this war has to end immediately because we had a lot of bloodshed, and we do hope the Security Council will help all of us to find a solution.
This is generally held to be the last diplomatic push for a settlement, the last chance to stop the war. Even now, the talks could drag on for a week or two, even more, unless and until the Americans come up with a definitive policy of their own. The negotiators here are especially dismayed by the absence of Bosnian President Alija Izetbegovic. If he thinks he can get a better deal from Washington, he has no incentive to be here. And the war at home drags on, and the casualties accumulate. Martin Bell, BBC News, the United Nations.
Here, the author Salman Rushdie has had a formal meeting at the Foreign Office, his first since the death threat issued against him in Iran over the publication of his book, The Satanic Verses. Mr. Rushdie's supporters welcomed the public demonstration of support as a sign that the government's taking a tougher stance against Iran on the issue. David Loyne reports.
Salman Rushdie's appointment at the Foreign Office was a further step in his attempt to live a more open life after being sentenced to death.
It's very important because it is the first time I've been here throughout this time, so I'll let you know.
He went through the same door as successive Iranian diplomats have over nearly 4 years, the latest only last week. They were told that there can be no normal relations until the death sentence on the author is lifted. Mr. Rushdie met the Foreign Office Minister Douglas Hogg for 45 minutes.
That was a very, very positive meeting. I think it was symbolically very important to be at the Foreign Office at last. And we were told by the government that they had decided to make a very substantial change of policy away from a softly approach and in favor of a much higher profile position on this issue.
The British government's public support for Salman Rushdie comes in response to a recent announcement by Iran's President Rafsanjani that the fatwa calling for his death could not be rescinded. Mr. Rushdie's survival and his increasing public role have fueled divisions in Tehran between the so-called hardliners and so-called moderates who want better relations with the West. After the years of private diplomacy, a gesture of public support, by inviting in Salman Rushdie, the Foreign Office is sending a clear signal that Tehran's internal political problems are no excuse for the continuing threats against a British citizen. In a separate BBC interview, Salman Rushdie has revealed that he's paying £100,000 a year towards the cost of his own protection.
Hillary Clinton, the United States First Lady, is on Capitol Hill to lobby leading politicians to back her plans for healthcare reform. She'll submit her proposals to President Clinton within 100 days, giving her an unprecedented role in American politics.
When First Ladies of the United States go to Congress, it has been to stand silently by their man. But for Hillary Clinton, the most powerful unelected political figure in Washington, this is business.
After the meeting.
Her job chairing the Presidential Task Force on Healthcare means the First Lady is not some decorative fixture. She's now responsible for the most ambitious of the promised Clinton reforms, fixing a system which is bankrupting America.
There is no way we'll ever get control of the federal budget deficit unless we do something about health care. I am grateful that Hillary has agreed to chair this task force, and not only because it means she'll be sharing some of the heat I expect to generate.
From the moment he was elected governor of Arkansas in 1978, she seemed an equal partner. The state's worst problem was education, and Mrs. Clinton was put in charge of reforms, doing then what she's expected to do for health now. She visited all 75 Arkansas counties, proposed an unthinkable tax increase, and against fierce resistance, demanded teachers be tested for competence.
If we are going to be holding accountable third graders and sixth graders and eighth graders, I believe we must hold accountable teachers as well.
The result? She won, and Mrs. Clinton persuaded some Arkansas politicians where Mr. Clinton could not.
Those in favor say aye.
And now one of the best legal minds in the country, Mrs. Clinton could, as she put it, have stayed home and baked cookies. Not very likely.
Nancy Reagan was once credited with a new China policy, meaning that she threw out all the old White House crockery. Hillary Clinton will not be involved in such trivial matters. In fact, as one commentator put it, if healthcare reform goes well, by the year 2000, she could run for president. Gavin Esler, BBC News, Washington.
There'll be more on Newsnight on BBC 2 at 10:30. But from the 9 o'clock news, good night.
Question time tonight comes from Westminster, at the political heart of the nation. On the panel, the man at the centre of crucial government decisions, the President of the Board of Trade, Michael Heseltine, plus Labour Party veteran Tony Benn, Ian McAllister, the chairman of Ford of Britain, and businesswoman Jan Hall. Our representative audience sets the agenda and judges the answers, all on Question Time, the nation's most popular talking shop, tonight at 10 o'clock on BBC1.
Starting shortly on BBC Two, The Trouble with Medicine asks whether greater emphasis should be placed on caring for the elderly at home.
Hello, good evening. Now the main stories from the Look North newsroom. Detectives investigating the killing of the West Yorkshire pharmacist Linda Fleming are tonight believed to be questioning her father, Derek. Katie Oscroft reports.
The father of Linda Fleming appeared in public 4 days after his daughter's disappearance to make this emotional appeal.
Linda, wherever you are, or for whatever reason, please come home, or just ring. We all love you, and we want you home with us.
Linda's body was found on moorland above Halifax. She'd be beaten over the head. Tonight, a 51-year-old man, believed to be her father Derek, is being questioned by police about the murder.
Miners' leaders have voted to ballot their members on strike action unless all 31 pits threatened with closure are kept open. The decision was taken at a special NUM delegate conference in Sheffield.
Today's meeting was set against anger from the NUM leadership that the Trade and Industry Select Committee had fallen short of recommending an end to the so-called rigged energy market. In the end, the meeting voted unanimously for a ballot for a 24-hour strike, followed by a rolling programme of industrial action.
We don't want to take strike action. What we want to do is work. Let me remind you that the people who want to bring our people out on permanent dispute, if you want, are the Tory government, who are threatening to sack 30,000 of our members.
All eyes are now on the ballot and whether members of the rail unions will give a strike their full support.
And a reminder of the day's main regional news story. The House of Lords has ruled that Hillsborough disaster victim Tony Bland should be allowed to die. He's been in a coma since the tragedy 4 years ago. And that's it from the Look North newsroom tonight. Good night. Now the weather with Rob McElwee.
Good evening, and especially good evening to London and the South East, as I know there are problems with reception. I'm afraid I can't do anything about it, nor can the BBC. It's due to the high pressure, and as long as we keep that, so you're likely to have those same problems. And that's where it is at the moment. That's the nose of high pressure, but there's a distinct difference up over Scotland, those frontal systems running in and out. That's where the thicker cloud is, and so that gives us a different area of weather for the night. Indeed, northern Scotland could see the odd period of heavy rain, might even see some sleet into Shetland as well. Otherwise, it dries up through Northern Ireland, Northern England, until we reach the foggy mess down the south. But it's not even just the south, from Lincolnshire across the North Midlands into Wales, where in places it is at the moment even freezing fog. The temperatures generally could dip to about 0 degrees in this foggy area, though they'll probably stay up around the edges. And of course, the further north you go, topsy-turvy world, the higher are the temperatures tonight. Tomorrow's problems are much the same as today's. We've got to get rid of this fog, and it will be thick in the morning. It will take even longer to thin. Very little of it will disappear completely. It'll be a misty and murky day. There will be some brighter spells through Wales, maybe southwest England, more especially though in northern England. Maybe even Cumbria will see the light. And in eastern Scotland, again, brighter, and indeed mild in many places up there. But the western and northern part of Scotland continuing dull, good deal of hill fog and further rain or drizzle. The temperatures then, as I mentioned, in the mild category again, 13 in the Moray Firth, 9s or 10s through Northern Ireland and Northern England. Northern Ireland really on the border between the dull and the brighter weather. But where we keep the dull weather, so we keep the low temperatures, 2 to 3 degrees. That really is cold, certainly colder than it should be. Now the winds are light still through England and most of Wales, hence the reason that fog or low cloud isn't moving. They're a little bit stiffer further north, but nothing really to worry about, and certainly lighter than they have been recently. That does present a further problem. For Midlands, the chance of pollution from sulphur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide, and in London, fairly high levels of nitrogen dioxide are possible tomorrow. The weekend sees little change in the general weather pattern, and therefore the weather will not change that much. Good night.